Alright, so this is the video from the second side that we didn't quite get to this morning. For the law of cosines, but I wanted to go ahead and post it so you'll have the examples. So this is 1 through 4 on the law of cosine side. So let's look at 1 and really 1 and 3 are very similar because you can see on both of those that you're looking for an angle. So it really doesn't matter which angle you find first. Like I'm going to choose to find angle x first. So since I'm finding angle x first, I know that 12, which is across from it, is going to be the number that goes in front. Remember the law of cosines, that was a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2 times b times c times the cosine of a. It would help if I had written that correctly. Cosine of a, there we go. And that the fact that this first number, right, that side has to be across from that angle. We talked about that in class, and that's what we did yesterday on Thursday in class. All right, so I'm going to go down here so that I can work it out. I got plenty of room. So for number 1 on that side, again, I'm going to choose to find the x first. So 12 would have to go in front. 12 squared equals. The other two sides, 10 and 16, in any order. So 10 squared plus 16 squared minus 2 times 10 times 16 times the cosine of x, right? That's what I'm looking for is x. Remember, we do have to do this one in pieces. This is actually like the second example that we did in class. So I'm going to do this in pieces. So 12 squared is 144. Do you remember, let me just do some changing here on my highlighter a little bit. I have to do this separately from this, right? Those are two separate things. Okay, so don't do them together. 10 squared plus 16 squared is going to be 356. So that's 356 minus 2 times 10 times 16 is 320 cosine x. That's an x, sorry. So and then I'm just going to solve, right? I'm going to subtract 356 from both sides. So I get 144 minus 356 is negative 212. So negative 212 equals, of course, these two added out, and I have a negative 320 cosine x left, right? Because it is a minus, that counts as it being negative. And then, of course, for my last step before I pick up my calculator to do the trig function is I would, of course, divide both sides by negative 320 because I'm trying to solve for the cosine of x, right? So I know what's going to happen is like I have this fraction right here, right? I've got this fraction. Oops, I didn't mean to write that right there. Now that I think about it. And if you put that in, right, you get 212. Let's see, that's divided by 320, and you get a positive 0.6625. Actually, isn't a bad one. But we're looking for an angle, right? And just like how in all of the previous problems that we've done, if I'm looking for an angle, I'm not going to do the cosine, I'm going to do the inverse cosine. So in my calculator, I'm going to type in the inverse cosine of that 212 over 320, or if you went ahead and found the decimal, you can do that answer function like we did previously on the law of sines. That works too. So I'm going to do that. Second cosine of that, and you get 49 degrees. It's 48.5. So x is approximately 49 degrees for that one. Okay, so that's for x. Now if you're looking, so this one was 49 degrees. Now to find y, I have a couple of different options. You can do exactly what we just did. Use the law of cosines because tan is across from y, and that would be great. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm going to give you the option. Now that we know that this is 49 degrees, and we obviously have the side across from it, I can now use the law of sines. honestly, it's going to be a lot easier and a lot shorter than what we just did, and it'll still give you an accurate answer. So I'm going to move back down here. Excuse me. So now I know that the sine of 49 and 12 go together. I'm just using the law of sines like I did on the previous side. I am looking for y, so it would be the sine of y degrees over, and it's across from 10. Okay, so this is a lot shorter than all of that algebra we just did, because if you watched the last video and paid attention to it, right, this is very repetitive. So I'm going to do 10 times the sine of 49, and then I'm going to divide that by 12, and I get 0.628924 right along decimal. And since I'm looking for an angle, I know I'm going to do the inverse sine of my answer. Let me do that now. Second sine of my answer is going to be 39 degrees. So y is approximately 39 degrees. Okay, so that's my suggestion. Rather than doing the law of cosines again, which you saw, to find the second answer on that one, I would just do the law of sines. It's so much shorter. All right, so let's look at number 2. Number 2 is not quite the same. I am looking for a side and an angle on this one. I'm going to find the side first. It's quite easy. I can see here that 30 degrees is across from the side that I'm looking for. And so that means I know my x is going to go in the front and the 30 degrees is going to go in the back. And of course, I'm going to use 20 and 10 in my formula. So we're going to come down here and do number 2. Here we go. So again, looking for x first, so it's going to be x squared equals the two other sides, the 20 and the 10, any order. Just make sure you're using both of them. 10 squared plus 20 squared minus 2 times 10 times 20 times the cosine of 30 degrees. All right, because we know x is across from 30, and that's why we're doing that. This is the one, if you remember, I can input that entire thing in my calculator, and I'm going to be very careful because we all know how I am as a person. So that means you probably also need to be careful too, making sure we're inputting it correctly. And I get 100, of course you're gonna, like my calculator gave me a root expression, so change that to a decimal. I get 153 point stuff. Obviously that's not how big side x is. That makes no sense since the other two sides are 20 and 10. I know, as we discussed in class, this is just like the Pythagorean theorem, right? It's x squared and not x. So I'm going to do the square root of my answer, right? So square root of my answer. Excuse me, and I get the value of x is approximately 12.4. Okay, so if you're finding a side, it's really, really easy. It's not all that algebra like we did back on number 1. It's all using our calculator. So 12.4 is side x. Okay, so let's look at that now that we have this side. So now that we know that this is 12.4, just like on the other problem, now I have a side and an angle across from each other. And if I want to find y, I can now do the law of sines. Otherwise, I'm going to have to do it like I did the very first one on number 1 with all of that algebra, and obviously I really don't want to do that. I mean, as much as I love algebra, that was a lot of work there on number 1, so I'm going to use my math toolbox, and that's what I'm going to use. Okay, so one more time, it was 12.4, and I know that it is across from the 30. So using the law of sines, I'm going to have the sine of 30 over 12.4. I am looking for angle y. So it's going to be the sine of y, and it is across from 20. So 20 is going to go on the bottom. So just using the law of sines, which again we know is super duper easy, a lot shorter. So 20 times the sine of 30, which actually happens to be exactly 10, divided by 12.4. And you do get a long decimal again. And just like every other time I'm looking for an angle, I'm going to do the inverse sine of my answer. So second sine answer is 53.8. Or since it's an angle, let's just do 54 degrees. So angle y is about 54 degrees. That's number 2. All right, number 3. Number 3 is exactly like number 1. Because I'm looking for 2 angles in this one. Just like last time, it doesn't matter what angle you find first. I'm going to do x just because that's alphabetically it comes first. So since x I can see is across from 5, that means I know that 5 has to go in front, right? The angle in the side, still using that pair, but slightly different from the law of sines. So on number 3, let's go way back down here. Here's how I'm going to start. So 5 squared is going to go in the front since I'm deciding to find x first. Again, the 6 and 8 in any order. So 6 squared plus 8 squared minus 2 times 6 times 8 times the cosine of x. So almost exactly like how we did number 1. Again, I've got to do it in pieces, right? I've got to do this separately than this. So I've got to be mindful of my math. Of course, 5 squared is 25. 6 squared plus 8 squared, I should be able to do in my head, but I don't trust myself today. So that is 100. Okay, I figured. I knew that, but my brain decided it was going to not work today. And minus 96, and then the cosine of x. Okay, again, it's really important that you do those separately and don't try to combine them because that 96 is connected to the cosine. Those are unlike terms. All right, my next step, I will be subtracting 100 from both sides. Of course, that's going to equal a negative 75 over here. These two add out. I get a negative 96 here, cosine x. And then I know that I'm going to be dividing by the negative 96 on both sides. And one more time, I'm looking for an angle. So since I'm looking for an angle, I know I'm going to do the inverse cosine. And again, I'm going to type in 75 over 96. Now listen, I'm leaving the negatives off. I know that a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so that's just extra typing that I know that's going to be a positive. Now, if that bothers you or you're not comfortable with your negatives, feel free to type those in. But, like, I'm not gonna, because I know a negative divided by a negative is a positive. I get x equals, since it's an angle, I'm going to go ahead and round up to 39 degrees. 39 degrees. Okay, so that is x, 39 degrees. Let's write that in. All right, so now that I know this is 39 degrees, the same thing is what happened on number 1 and number 2. If I really wanna, I can do the law of cosines again to find y, or I can just use the law of sines, right? I know that I can see here that y is across from 8, right? And now that I know that the 39 and 5 go together, I can just use the law of sines. It's so much shorter because that's a lot of work. So over here, it's going to be the sine of 39, right? That's what I just figured out, goes with the 5. That's the angle pair side that I now know that go across from each other. I'm looking for angle y, so the sine of y over 8, right? It's across from the 8, and cross multiply and divide. So 8 times the sine of 39, and then I'm going to divide by 5, and did I make a mistake? 8 times the sine of 39, what did I do? I must have done something wrong. All right, let me take a time out and figure it out. Okay, so I figured out my problem. They're going to be really picky on rounding. If you look at the picture, angle y really looks like it's close to a right angle, and I think that's what's happening here. What caught me off guard is whenever I went and did this, right, I did my cross multiplying and dividing with this, I got a 1 point something. That's a huge red flag. Anytime you're looking for an angle, you should always get a decimal that's 0 point something so that I can do the inverse sign. If you get something that has a 1 in front, you made a mistake. It's not possible. It does not exist. So here's what I went back and I looked back at this answer. I rounded that up, right? Whenever I rounded it up to a whole number. Miss Wyndham's been telling you to do that. Totally my fault. It was actually 38.6. That's what before I rounded it, that's what it was. So let me show you that 0.4 difference of rounding that I guess I probably shouldn't have done. Shame on me. So I'm going to come over here and show you what the difference is. So I'm going to use 38.6, the rounded to the 10th place, like I probably should have followed their directions. Didn't, so that one's on me. So this time when I cross multiply and divide, I get 8 times the sine of 38.6, and then I divide that by 5. Now I have a number that is smaller than 1. I have 0.99 stuff, right? That's what I need. I need a number that starts with 0 point. So now if I do the inverse sine of my answer, like I always do, it's not going to give me an error. Had I left that at 39 and tried to continue like I was going a second ago, my calculator would have thrown up an error and said, hey, you can't do that. And that's because, hey, you can't do that. You have to have a decimal that is smaller than 1. You get 86.5. So see, I was right. It was really, really close to 90. You get 86.6, I guess, technically, 86.6 degrees. So yeah, that was, whoops, be careful on that. Yeah. So that's number 3. Number 4 is a lot like number 2. In that, I'm asked for a side and an angle. So I'm going to find the side first, right? So I can see here is x. I can see that it's across from the 45, right? So I know that I'm good to go. So I'm going to come on down here and do number 4. Wow, I went way far down, didn't I? So for number 4, again, the x is going to go in the front because that is the side I'm looking for. The other two sides in any order, which are 35 and 40. I'm going to have big numbers here. 35 squared plus 40 squared minus 2 times 35 times 40 times the cosine of, and then the angle they give me is 45 degrees. So I'm just going to put all of that in my calculator. I like finding sides with the law of cosines. It's really super easy. Minus 2 times 35 times 40 times the cosine of 45. There we go. Get a funky decimal. And then again, I get like 845 something, right? That obviously makes no sense. Again, you have to do the square root. So I'm going to do the square root of my answer, and I get 29.1. So x is approximately 29.1. That's how big that side is. Totally makes a lot more sense. All right, so as has happened on the other 3, if this is now 29.1, now I know a side angle pair across from each other. And if I really wanted to, I could do the law of sines to find y, right? Because I know y is across from the 40. And that's exactly what I'm going to do because it's a whole lot shorter. So let me go back down one last time, using the law of sines to find angle y. So I'm going to have the sine of, 45 over, and I just figured out that side was 29.1. All right, those are the two that I know are now across from each other. And the sine of y over 40. So now I can cross multiply and divide like I've been doing. I should not have a problem with this one, I hope. Times the sine of 45. And then I'm going to divide that by 29.1. Yep, I'm good. So now I'm going to do the inverse sine, right, because I'm looking for an angle. Anytime you're looking for an angle, use the inverse. So the inverse sine of my answer is 76.4 degrees, or 76. I'm okay with you rounding at 76 degrees. All right, so that's just a recap on the law of cosine.